In the year 1258, the city of Baghdad was not just a city, it was the center of the world. It was the jewel of Islam, a metropolis of 1 million people, filled with palaces of marble, gardens of paradise, and a legendary house of wisdom where the greatest minds of the earth gathered. It was the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, a dynasty that had stood for 5 centuries. The Caliph, al-Mustasim Billah, sat on a throne believing he was the shadow of God on earth, untouchable and invincible. But on the horizon, a storm was gathering, a storm made of flesh, steel, and fire. The Mongols were coming. Led by Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, the Mongol army was a force of nature that had already crushed everything in its path, from China to Persia. When Hulagu reached the gates of Baghdad, he offered the Caliph one chance: surrender, destroy your walls, and bow to me. But the Caliph, blinded by arrogance and surrounded by advisors who feared to tell him the truth, laughed at the threat. He believed that if Baghdad were attacked, the entire Muslim world from Morocco to India would rise up to defend him. He was wrong. No one came. The siege began on January 29th. It didn't last long. The Mongols were masters of siege warfare. They built a palisade around the entire city to ensure no one could escape. They bombarded the walls with catapults and heavy stones. Inside the city, panic set in. The Caliph, realizing too late that his army was weak and unpaid, tried to negotiate. He sent out his vizier with gifts, but Hulagu refused them. The time of talk was over. The time of blood had begun. On February 10th, Baghdad fell. What followed was a week of slaughter so horrific that historians struggle to describe it. The Mongols entered the city and unleashed hell. They killed everyone: men, women, children, the elderly. Estimates of the dead range from 200,000 to over 1 million. The streets ran with blood. But the greatest tragedy was the death of knowledge. The Mongols took the contents of the House of Wisdom, priceless manuscripts on medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and mathematics, and threw them into the Tigris River. It is said that the river ran red with blood from the bodies, and then black with ink from the books. The intellectual heritage of centuries was washed away in a single afternoon. But what of the Caliph, the man who thought he was untouchable? His fate was the most shocking of all. Hulagu Khan captured al-Mustasim and his entire family. He wanted to make an example of them, but there was a problem. Mongol tradition and superstition held that if the blood of a king or a royal ruler was spilled onto the earth, it would anger the sky gods and cause natural disasters like earthquakes. So, Hulagu had to find a way to kill the Caliph without shedding a single drop of his blood on the ground. First, Hulagu decided to mock the Caliph's greed. He locked al-Mustasim in his own royal treasury, surrounded by mountains of gold coins, diamonds, and jewels that he had hoarded for years, instead of spending them on his army. The Caliph was starving. He begged for food. Hulagu brought him a gold plate with gold nuggets and said, "Eat your gold. If you had spent this iron and gold on your soldiers, you might have defeated me." The Caliph replied that he could not eat gold. Hulagu laughed and said, "Then why did you keep it?" After days of psychological torture, the final execution began. The method was brutal, humiliating, and uniquely Mongol. On February 20th, 1258, the Caliph was taken outside the city walls. He was wrapped tightly in a magnificent Persian carpet or rug. He was rolled up like a piece of luggage until he couldn't move or breathe properly. Then Hulagu ordered his cavalry to advance. Hundreds of Mongol horses were ridden over the rolled-up carpet. The Caliph was trampled to death. His bones were crushed inside the rug, his body turned to pulp, but his blood stayed inside the fabric, soaking into the wool, satisfying the Mongol superstition. Not a drop touched the earth. The leader of the faithful, the successor to the prophet, died under the hooves of foreign horses, wrapped in the very luxury he loved so much. As for his family, most were killed, his sons were executed, his daughters were taken as slaves and distributed among the Mongol warlords to be sent back to Mongolia as concubines. The lineage that had ruled for 500 years was extinguished in mud and blood. The smell of the rotting corpses in Baghdad became so unbearable that Hulagu and his army had to move their camp away from the city to avoid disease. Baghdad, the city of lights, was left as a ghost town, a ruin of smoke and silence. It would take centuries for the city to recover, but the Golden Age was over forever. The story of Al-Mustasim serves as a brutal lesson in history. Wealth and lineage mean nothing without the strength and wisdom to protect them. The Mongols didn't just conquer a city, they broke the back of a civilization, and they did it by rolling its king in a carpet.